Part of the reason Spike is in my life is he's there to help me process these, karmic experiences that I'm going to have, and he's going to make them easier for me, right? He's going to bite that bullet for me.
Welcome to season 2 of the podcast, Spirit Doggies. I'm your host, Danny Finkhauser. This podcast series explores the spiritual connection between humans and dogs and is a companion to my short story, Dog Deities. Dog Deities is about a fictional society where people idolize their dogs, literally. You can learn more about the podcast and read the short story at dogdeities.com. Welcome back to Spirit Doggies, the Danny Finkhauser podcast. I'm your host, Danny. Today's guest is Morgan Balavage. Morgan is a business coach, yoga teacher, manifestation expert, fellow teacher on the Insight Timer app, and one of the most highly trained and skilled individuals I've encountered in mindfulness and spirituality. So thank you for being here, Morgan. How are you doing?
Thank you. Well, my ego is feeling very flattered, so you're my self-esteem fairy for the day.
Amazing. Starting the morning right. I'm excited to talk to you because I know that animal communication is one of the things you do that I haven't gotten to hear much about because you do so many other things as well. But I have to say that when I was first looking for a business coach and I came into one of your Insight Timer sessions, you mentioned that you had a Chihuahua named Spike, and I have a Chihuahua. And I was like, oh, that's my sign. That's like, somehow I was like, we're a good fit somehow if we both have Chihuahuas. So I'm curious if you find that, do you tend to work with people who are dog owners, Chihuahua owners, or are there other themes and types in terms of the types of clients that you have?
I definitely work with animal lovers exclusively. I don't put that in my marketing, but it tends to be that spiritual people need to have animals around. They're great. I mean, in addition to just being adorable balls of love, they're great emotional processing tools. And Spike in particular is a psychic channel in and of himself. His story before I adopted him, he's a rescue, is very interesting. But he's my very first Chihuahua. I only had big dogs before him. And I did not know that like it was going to be such a thing that I meet people every single day who hire me because of Spike. They may not realize that, they may not say it out loud, but Spike kind of pulls in Chihuahua people because we are a breed of people just like they're a breed of dog, you know?
Totally. And I didn't know that I was a Chihuahua person. Like I wasn't looking for a specific breed, but now that I have one, definitely feel connected with the breed.
Definitely. Yeah, I remember the first time I took him to an airport and people were just walking up to us to tell us about their chihuahuas. And I was like,
Oh,
this didn't happen when I had a pit bull.
yeah, very true. Yeah. People even will be like, oh, my dog is part Chihuahua. There's Chihuahua in her. My dog's favorite breed is Chihuahuas. So they're very special.
Very special little angels and little assholes too.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you don't necessarily advertise that you work with animals, but you have helped friends find a lost pet or done sessions once people know that you do this. So, how did you first encounter animal communication, and then what inspired you to learn it?
So I first encountered it as like a career or as something that you can get trained in because someone hired me to help promote their animal services. And Spike knows that we're talking about him. He just walked over. He's like, "Oh, you guys meet me? What's up?"
Yeah.
So my client and my friend, Alex, hired me to help her promote her business. She hired me as a marketing and business coach. And then she was promoting this workshop, and I was like, oh, well, I want to do that. I want to learn how to communicate with animals. And the workshop opened up a huge, beautiful line of communication between Spike and I. Really fascinating how it really changed the way he understands me and the way that, more importantly, I understand him and what he's trying to communicate. But it also made it really interesting for how I've related to other people.
Oh,
Because
wow.
people are animals as well. And it gave me almost more compassion as I'm, walking through the world, I can love any dog, right? I can see any dog and be like, I want to get closer to that dog. Doesn't matter what kind of dog, doesn't matter if it's been abused and is exhibiting signs of aggression. I instantly love that dog. By the power of transference, I can learn how to love people like that. It's harder for me. So, so I was considering as I wanted to take the workshop, first of all, to help my friend promote it. I wanted to understand more of what was going to be involved in the workshop, but also to take on, the skills for myself. But when I thought about like, okay, well, do I want to like niche this out from a marketing perspective? And the reality was, no, I don't want to do that. This is a gift that I want to be able to offer my friends that I want to use for myself. So whenever I see on Instagram stories, like, someone has a missing pet, I'll send them a message and say like, hey, I do this, I do animal communication. I've had this level of success with it. I'm not going to charge you for this. If you feel like donating, that's cool. But this is just a public service that I do because, oh my God, a lost pet is just the most heartbreaking thing. And so it's a skill that I love to offer just, karmically, just to put that energy out into the world where if someone needs to know that their pet is at peace so they can give up hope, to give them that opportunity. And if I can tell someone like, hey, this is where your pet is, this is where you can go find them, it brings them so much joy when it actually happens. I had one client who was moving from Texas to California, and one of her cats went missing. And I said, she's in a really dark place. And I was like, you need to like, it's like, where's your couch right now? And it turned out the cat had hidden in the couch in the moving van. It was like a 3-day move from Texas
Oh
to
my
California. And the
gosh.
cat survived. And it was,
Yeah.
all just a happy ending. But it was like, can you imagine you're going through moving, your pet's just gone missing, you're crossing multiple states, and you're just heartbroken and devastated and so stressed out. So my client immediately calmed down once I gave her that information. And, as I said, it was a happy ending for all involved. There was another example, a boarding school friend of mine posted that her kitten had gone missing. And so she asked me, like, what should I do? And I said, okay, well, she's like in a park, just like living her best cat life. Like she needs to have this adventure. So just leave your patio door open, because that was the way she got out. Like she knows how to get back, and she'll be back in
Mm.
3 days. And 3 days later, I get a DM, and my friend was ecstatic because the cat came back. And
Yeah.
I was just like, oh, so honored to be able to give her that peace of mind. So yeah, it's something I love to be able to offer to my community. It's something I love to be able to give to myself. And I have monetized so much of my life, and I'm okay not monetizing that part of my life.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. I'm in some neighborhood groups, both where I used to live in Brooklyn, as well as where I am now. And I often see people saying like, oh, the dog slipped the leash with the dog walker and stuff like that. And there was a whole saga of, a bunch of people looking for this dog. And eventually they were like, stop trying to find her because she's scared. And it's just such a stressful situation. And so what really amazes me is like, as you're describing the specificity of kind of the information that you get, that it's 3 days, that you can see the park and stuff like that. So it's just, it's this amazing untapped resource.
It really is. And I'd be curious to know what your relationship is to it, because I know it's different depending on how your brain works. But for me, it's almost like I'm watching the movie from the eye of the animal, or it's like when you're in a
Oh,
dream, but you can kind of like see through your dream eyes, and you can kind of like, you can't really control where you're looking, but you can like absorb the information and do something with it. So, like from an energetic perspective, it's just a very different way because that's not how it works when I tap in to psychic work for humans at all.
oh,
It's
okay.
so different with animals. And part of it, I think, is because animals don't communicate in a man-made language. So when I'm working with humans, most of the information comes through as English, and that's how my brain
Okay.
interprets it and translates it. But for animals, it comes through as a visual, and other senses. Like sometimes they'll get real, like especially with dogs, they'll get really strong smells, right? Or with birds, it's like very distinct eyesight, but like on a macro level. So it's
Okay.
like I'm like zooming in on something, right? But that's been a really interesting shift for me, is learning how to visualize what I'm seeing and translate it into relevant information for humans.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I tend to ask people how they receive the information. And because I know some people, like it's, the clairs, sometimes it's a knowing, sometimes it's the words, sometimes it's like that snapshot, but I've never heard that you're saying that it's like seeing through the animal's own senses. So that's super interesting that it shows up differently for animals.
Yeah, yeah. For me, I kind of logically explain it to myself in terms of like, well, all energy is connected. So all I'm really doing is like turning into that you're tuning into that channel. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, the fact that it was so different for animals versus humans. And in some ways it was a lot easier tapping into animals because they are so much more instinctive and intuitive and connected to themselves. And in other ways, it's more challenging because I'm trying to translate between humans and
Yeah.
animals.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so I want to get into your backstory with Spike. So, what is the soul connection between you guys? Would you call Spike your soulmate? How did you find each other?
So I had a conversation with another psychic friend of mine while I was going through some relationship problems, and she was like, "Girl, Spike is your husband." I was like, I don't know if I want to accept that as reality, but he is definitely my soul dog. Oh my goodness, he has been such a gift. So I found him when I was living in Santa Barbara, and I mentioned to a neighbor of mine, "Oh, I was thinking about adopting a dog. I just bought a place, so I didn't have any like landlord restrictions anymore." And she was like, okay, you have to go through this foster agency that I work with. And the next day, she dropped off a newspaper article about the foster agency. It's called Cold Noses, Warm Hearts in Goleta, California. And you can like check out a dog for the weekends and give it back during the week. And it was like, this is perfect because I travel a lot. So I'll just have a dog on the weekends and I'll get a new dog every weekend. It's going to be great. So the first weekend, I had a little Wheaten Terrier. We had a good time. I cried when I gave him back. And I was expecting to pick him up the next weekend. And I was kind of disappointed when he'd been adopted, even though I was happy
Oh,
for him.
wow. Yeah.
But then they said, well, we have this other dog. He just came in. Do you want to check him out? And they just carried out this little 3 pound puddle of a dog, this little Chihuahua. And he just kind of looked at me and I looked at him and I was like, sure, I'll take him for the weekend. And so the whole point of this foster agency was the dogs wear this little cape that says like adopt me, and we're supposed to be socializing them and getting them out into the world. And so everywhere I would go, people would say, Morgan, you should adopt him. And I was like, no, no, I'm just fostering him. And then by the end of the weekend, I was like, I should adopt him.
Yeah.
And I called the agency and I said, hey, I'm thinking about keeping him. And they said, great, that's fine. And I was like, do I owe you any money or anything? And they were like, no. And I was like, okay. They said, well, if you want to come pick up the rest of his stuff, like we have food for him. And I was like, and they just gave me everything that I
Oh, wow.
needed, a
Yeah.
bed. And I had no idea, because this was my first small dog, he was going to need a whole wardrobe. It's too cold in the world for a little guy. And Spike was in bad shape at that point. He had a mouthful of rotting teeth, so he could barely eat. So my free dog was $2,000 the first month because I had to go get all of his teeth removed or most of his
Yeah.
teeth removed. And then he started to gain weight. He more than doubled his body size. He's now tipping the
Wow.
scales at 9 pounds.
Yeah.
And I literally thought I was adopting a dog for like a couple of months. Like they said he was 7 years old because he'd had such a rough life up to that point. I didn't think he was going to live for very long. So I was like, all right, 6 months, and I'll go back to my crazy travel schedule. And that was like 8 years ago. So
Oh
he
my
is now,
gosh.
best guess is he's 14 and he's doing great. We've had so many adventures. He travels with me all over the world. And one of my favorite stories about Spike is, so a few months after I adopted him, I had him in the yoga studio where I was teaching yoga just at the front desk, checking students in. And a woman walks up and says, oh, is that Spike? And I said, oh, yeah, how do you know Spike? And she said, I'm the one who saved him from the shelter and gave him to the foster agency.
Oh my
I was
gosh.
like, what? And she said, yeah, let me tell you what happened. And so she was a breed specific dog rescuer. She really loved Australian Shepherds. And so whenever an Australian Shepherd would appear in Pet Finder, she would drive to like anywhere in the nation to go adopt it and get it into her foster agencies. And at the same time, because Chihuahuas are such a high risk breed, she would also adopt a Chihuahua. So she was adopting, two dogs and then farming them out to the foster agencies to find their forever homes. So she worked with the agency that I was working with as like, the source of puppies who need a home. And yeah, so and she was the one who actually gave him the name Spike. So she
Oh,
said when I adopted him, the name he had at the shelter was Drake, and he didn't feel like a Drake to me. So I renamed him Spike. And when I got him, he had this little spiky collar on.
yeah.
So I didn't end up changing his name. I was raised that it's bad luck to change a dog's name. So and I figured his name had been changed enough times at that point. So we stuck with Spike. Although of course he has many nicknames. And then when I worked with my animal communication client, she told me more of his backstory, which got really interesting. So it turned out that he had been raised, it wasn't like a puppy farm, like it was the kind of place where they just never neutered or spayed their dogs, so there were always puppies around. And Spike, when he had been found on the streets and rescued, had been intact. He hadn't been neutered. He
Hmm.
has since been neutered, of course. But so he had fathered many, many puppies and was
Oh,
like kind of
wow.
the king of everything. And he had this trigger when I adopted him where he wouldn't let any man touch him. Like he hated men. And so I asked if there had been some abuse. And that my animal communicator friend, like you could just see her face go dark. And she was like, yeah, there was a guy there who hated dogs, and Spike hated him. And he was always trying to protect his puppies from this
Oh,
big mean guy. And eventually, this family got into some financial trouble and hired a bruja to help them. And so the bruja recognized that Spike was a psychic channel. And instead of payment, she asked for Spike. And Spike did not like being used for this like black magic. He didn't like
oh
his
my
being
gosh.
around this darkness. So he ran away from that home, and he knew that he was looking for the light, and he was looking for me. This is all
Oh
information from
my
my animal
gosh.
communicator friend.
Yeah.
And so he just goes running out into the night, eventually gets picked up by animal control, and then, through this system finds me. And the foster family that had been taking care of him before told me like he never warmed up to anyone. But for me, like as soon as we got in the car, he curled up in my lap, and that was like the end of it. We've been stuck at the hip.
Yeah. Yeah.
Been for years. So yeah, so he had an interesting traumatic background. He had a lot of triggers that we had to work through, obviously the health stuff that we had to work through. And now he is a very well-adjusted, very good boy. He's certified good boy. He now runs up to every man that he sees with his tail wagging because he thinks everyone is his friend and everyone has a treat for him. And he's almost always right. People are almost always delighted to see him. But you do every once in a while see people who have been like traumatized by chihuahuas because they do have a reputation for being a little defensive ankle biters. So every once in a while, someone will like run away from him because they had this childhood of like getting beat up by chihuahuas. And Spike, of course, just thinks it's a game. And so he's
Yeah.
running after them, having the time of his life. They're terrified. And that's the only time we really have issues at this point. But yeah, we've had a lot of fun adventures together, and he is 100% my soul dog, and I love him so much.
It's such an amazing story. And I think, especially, for me or other people who have rescue animals, like I don't know anything about Bambi's past. And that's one of the things I'm most curious about through animal communication. And it's like, maybe it feels like it's not a big deal, but I'm curious to know that stuff. And it sounds like it helped a lot even in dealing with Spike's triggers to kind of have some awareness of what his earlier life was like.
Yeah, help me better understand how to help him, right? Like,
Yeah.
okay, well, this makes sense why you're scared of these men. So let's like retrain your brain to understand like not all men, yes, a lot of dogs experience abuse, but most people are kind and can be trusted to like just be happy to see you. And it was also a
Yeah.
good, experience for me as someone who's been traumatized and abused by people of like if I can teach this to my dog, I can teach this to myself. And so it was a healing journey we got to go on together of like learning how to trust strangers and look forward to seeing them instead of being instantly defensive and suspicious.
Yeah. Yeah. And so let's talk more about that idea of mirroring. So in my short story Dog Deities that I'm launching along with this podcast, I include kind of that the joke of like people look like their dogs, 101 Dalmatians. Like it's just so common in art and stuff. And so in my story, it's like people are expected to look like their dogs. If they don't, it's a little weird. But in real life, there is kind of this idea that pets can mirror us and that can help us with our growth. So how do you explain that to people?
Well, first of all, when I go to my hairstylist, I bring my dog and I say I want to match him. So I don't
Okay.
know if anyone else is doing that, but that may be part of the phenomenon. No, I think from a human perspective, we seek like attracts like, right? So visually, for those of us who have sight, we're looking for something that looks like us. So there may be some sort of subconscious pull in that direction. But from my personal experience with all of my dogs, they've all had some kind of traumatic background. They've all needed to be rescued. Yep, sounds about right. All right, that tracks. They're all pure love. And once you get past the initial like barrier of trauma, there's just like nothing but love and snuggles. So for Spike, when we first met, I was going through a breakup. My mom calls him my breakup dog. And I needed something to love. And so did Spike, right? Dogs need something to love. And especially Chihuahuas, like they're bred for protection, right? They're bred to like keep the mouse out of the houses, and they're bred to let us know when somebody is there. And that's what I needed in my life. I needed to let me know if there's danger so that I could go check it out instead of triggering myself into thinking there's danger and then just evolving into a trauma response. So having Spike there to kind of mirror like, okay, something's in the air. I don't know if it's my energy or if there's energy out there, but I know that I now need to take a moment, pause, check in with myself, check in with Spike, and kind of like take in my surroundings to understand, okay, is this a real threat? And I translate that for my clients in terms of like we all have our inner chihuahua that's going to be terrified of any sort of trigger. And your job as the owner, as the alpha, is to trust them that like they're genuinely scared and it's not ridiculous. It's worth checking out to see if there's anything there. But to also like point out when it's just a leaf that's rattling by, or when
Yeah.
it's just a car that went by or a motorcycle and not a gigantic monster that's about to eat us.
Yeah.
So helping Spike learn how to calm down from that. I mean, it's been like the first year with fireworks, we were both just a wreck. He was shaking the whole time. But by the next year, he was like not even shrugging or barking or even noticing the fireworks. So it's been really beautiful to watch us both progress from having these extreme triggers to just being like, oh no, it's all right. We know how to handle this one. We're safe. It's okay. So I love giving that healing story to my clients of like, if a tiny traumatized dog with a mouthful of rotten teeth can learn how to trust humans again, you too can heal yourself. And I think all rescues and most animals in the world are just such beautiful examples of how resilient we are and how truly everything is forgivable, right? It doesn't make it okay that bad things happen. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't set boundaries, but everything you can release the horrific things that happen to you so that they no longer have to affect you on the day to day. And I think animals are just such a beautiful way of exemplifying that, especially from a nervous system perspective, because you'll see like, a dog gets up from pretty much any activity, does a little like nose to tail shake and is just literally shaking off the energy. Like if you could see energy, you would see it flying off like droplets of water, like he just gotten
Yeah.
out of the bath. And that's what we humans have to do too. So every time I see Spike do it, I do it too, just a little like, shake to shake off that energy. And it's just a nice reminder of like, I don't have to hold on to anything that isn't mine. And Spike is very good at letting go at anything that doesn't interest him in that moment.
You might share my opinion that everyone is intuitive. Learning intuitive practices helps me feel more confident making everyday decisions and regulating my emotions. And the online course that I took with Lotus Lantern became a foundation for so many other skills. Reverend Liliana has a compassionate and inclusive teaching style. Follow my affiliate link in the show notes to learn more. I got into meditation because it helped me get past writer's block, but I never had a committed practice until I did meditation teacher training with The Path. Halfway through the 3-month program, I was having vivid cinematic dreams every night, and I could sit cross legged for 25 minutes without moving. The real reason I love this program is the people that you meet. If you're looking for soul family, try meditation teacher training, and you can find my affiliate link for The Path in the show notes. And finally, if you're ready to manifest your own spirit doggy, you'll want to join the workshop and community called To Be Magnetic. This is not your typical manifestation class, but it's a blend of journal questions and hypnosis meditations that help you to excavate core wounds. And a side effect of doing this work is that you make choices from your true center. So go to the show notes to find my affiliate link for To Be Magnetic, and you'll also get 15% off. So I want to talk more about how Spike plays into healing, but first you mentioned kind of how Spike helps with knowing if there's danger or not, and that you travel with Spike. So how has Spike helped you when you're traveling?
So we used to live off the grid in Mexico in this crumbling house on the edges of the cliffs of northern Baja. And I didn't realize it when I booked it, but I show up and surrounded by graves, essentially. I had moved into a de facto cemetery. And it turned out that a lot of people had died in this area. And this has been a theme through my life that I'm called to areas where like a lot of people have died. And so it wasn't like an evil area necessarily. These are just, crumbling cliffs in Mexico. It's, dangerous place. People fall off and unfortunately they pass. And so we were super haunted. And the first night we were there, I found a huge scorpion, like as big as a margarita glass. And the reason I
Oh,
know it was
geez.
that big is because I had to get a margarita glass to cover it and then, slide a piece of paper and escort it outside. And from then on out, every day we found tens to hundreds of baby scorpions. Like that mama scorpion must have come in and just laid eggs because, man, they were everywhere. So now I have this literal threat of poison, right?
Yeah.
Everywhere. And I'm worried, I'm worried for myself, but like I'll survive. I'm mostly worried for my dog because like he's not going to survive a scorpion bite, right? And I'm like, they're everywhere. I don't know how to handle this. I'm not going to douse my place in, vinegar like you're supposed to do to get rid of all the scorpions. I'm just going to have to trust my dog that he has a will to live and he's going to survive this. And then, a few days later, we see like rattlesnakes everywhere. And a few days later, he gets attacked by another dog. And I'm just like, what is going on? And I talked to my psychic friend who had actually recommended that I go to this place in Baja. And she was like, Spike is, first of all, the scorpions aren't attacking you. The scorpions are there to protect you, right? They're actually protecting you from the ghosts that are haunting this
What?
area. And I was like, whoa. So that makes sense why they didn't attack Spike either. But then she was like, yeah, and then Spike's kind of taking the bulk of like what karmically has to happen to you here. So like if he hadn't have been attacked, you would have gotten really hurt. And so he's kind of transmuting the karmic energy that you came here to process
Oh my
for you.
gosh.
And, it was still devastating to me, right? Like
Yeah.
watching my dog get attacked, having to like fight this other dog to get him off. It was a
Wow.
big Mexican hunting dog. Um, and then, would drive, I had to wait 24 or not, I had to wait overnight to drive him to the vet because it wasn't safe to drive at night on these cliffs, off road. And then I had to leave him at, the Mexican vet where I don't speak the language. They didn't speak English. So I'm just like, here's my dog. I hope it's okay.
Oh.
And then just as a funny side note, after a whole day of like he's been under anesthesia, they've had to do surgery to clean him up and stitch him up. I get the bill at the end of the day and they're like, we're so sorry, it's gonna be $60. And I was like, can I pay you more? In America,
Yeah.
this would have been a $10,000 day easily. So if your dog's gonna get attacked, Mexico is the place for it to happen. The vets did a great job. But I then had to like go, I had to keep myself calm and my nervous system regulated in order to help Spike heal over the next few weeks. And he's totally fine, no scars, no issues, no long-term injuries, and no triggers with other dogs, which was kind of my main concern. Is like, I don't want him to be scared of other dogs, even though he's more of a people dog than a dog's dog. But that's where I started to realize, like, oh, this is part of the reason Spike is in my life, is he's there to help me process these, karmic experiences that I'm going to have, and he's going to make them easier for me, right? He's going to bite that bullet for me. And it just makes me so grateful for him that he's agreed to serve that role for me in this life. And it also makes me very protective of him because I don't want him to have to go through anything that isn't necessary for both of us.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds like a really intense experience, really scary to especially when you want to protect your dog's hurt and having to wait to get the medical support, but also really fascinating to be able to tap into that like higher intelligence and understand that even something that seems like a very bad thing was actually a protection from something worse.
Yeah, and that's been such an interesting perspective to give to my past traumatic experiences, like before I had Spike, of, I can let in that mindset of, yeah, that sucked, and it could have been worse, and I can use it to make me, a person who is able to be more open-hearted and compassionate and loving in this world instead of using it to close down my heart and get really bitter and terrified of the world. And yeah, watching Spike heal from things very quickly and not just hold on to that grudge for years and years the way I would have done has made it a lot easier for me to learn how to just let stuff go.
Yeah. And so then you also mentioned how Spike has this psychic channel. So how did you figure out that Spike had that gift, and how does that play into your healing sessions?
So this was another message from one of my psychic friends who was like, "Oh, wow, Spike is really connected." And I was like, "Yeah, all dogs are." And she was like, "No, like he is really connected. Like he is a gift from the angels and a direct channel." So one of the images that my psychic friend gave me is she was like, it's like he's surrounded in a black pyramid of protection at all times. It's like he's basically walking shungite, where he is just constantly absorbing and transmuting any sort of dark energy when you're around. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting because he comes to my healing sessions, whether I'm doing them online or whether I'm doing them in person. He is there and he will get right where whatever chakra is being affected, he will like lean into that area. Like if it's heart, he'll like put his head right on my heart, or if it's in person, he'll like go lay right by that person's heart. And it's like some part of him just knows like this is where the healing is needed. And this is where if I just sit here for a few minutes, like a tree absorbs, CO2 and turns it into oxygen, I'm going to absorb this trauma and I'm going to transmute it into joy one way or another. How does it work on a like physical level? I don't know. This is a psychic podcast, so I think we have to accept that some things we just can't explain with our little human brains. We can feel them, but we can't necessarily put it into a tangible, scientific, extraordinary test, of language to explain what's actually happening. But that's kind of how I visualize it. Is he's basically walking shungite.
Yeah, actually, one thing I noticed, so Bambi likes to sleep in her own bed, and then in the morning she'll whimper to get pulled up into my bed with me. It's very cute. But sometimes in the morning, like as I'm waking up, I'll sort of cuddle her like right next to my heart. And I can feel like energetically some kind of like, I would call it maybe like a heart coherence. I definitely feel something different when she's like right in the chest area. And that's something that I did here, thinking about how it might work physiologically. It's just kind of like that regulation. So I think there is something to that. Yeah, also something energetic and psychic as well.
Yeah, I know exactly that feeling you're talking about. It's like it just feels like pure love is wafting off of them. It's
Yeah.
so interesting, but it's very visceral. You can definitely feel it.
Yeah, yeah. So after having conversations with animals, and I'm always curious to ask, I'm sure you've mentioned birds, dogs, and cats, but are there other animals that you've communicated with?
Yeah, I talk a lot to spiders.
Okay. Which is crazy that they're so small, but you're talking to a specific spider.
Yeah, so I grew up extremely arachnophobic, like panic attacks, really like devastating. I would flip out. I couldn't be in the same room if there was a spider. Like if I was reading a magazine and there was a spider on a page, I would like throw the magazine across the room and like burst into tears. And I had to heal that over time because spiders are, just such a part of our world. But I also ended up in areas where there were just a lot of spiders. There just happened to be a lot of spiders. They're like in Mexico, so many tarantulas. And I'm Buddhist, so I couldn't kill them. And even if I wanted to, like they freaked me out so much that I couldn't get close enough to even kill them. So I started telling them, hey, I'm really scared of you. Could you leave? or just like hide yourself so I don't have to see you. Like, I understand you're doing good things in the world, like, yes, living your life, but like, I just can't have you around. And usually within an hour, they would go. And
Uh-huh.
like after a lifetime of, having to embarrass myself over and over again, like finding strangers on the street, like, oh, there's a spider in my apartment. Could you come get it out for me? I'm freaking out. I could finally just be like, hey, spider, like, go find a corner, get out of my eyesight. I don't want to see you. And they just disappear. I don't know if they can hear me. I don't know if they feel it. It's happens too often for it to be coincidence. Like, I have a very skeptical mind about a lot of things, but the fact that it works every single time all over the world, it's like, all right, this is a way, for me to handle this phobia that isn't as bad a part of my life as it used to be, but definitely is still in my world. I've communicated with lots of snakes before, like the rattlesnakes in Mexico. I was like, look, my landlord's going to kill you if you're here. You need to get out of here. I get that this is like your feeding ground, but like if he sees you, he's going to kill you. So just trying to like pass along that message of you're under threat right now. What other animals have I communicated with? I think that's the bulk of them. I don't get a lot from like mice or rats or anything. I know a lot of people have like really deep relationship with rats. I've never really had that relationship with them. I've never experimented with trying to communicate with them. But yeah, it's mostly the spiders are the ones where I'm like, this is where I want to put this skill. Just get away from me.
It's so useful.
So useful.
So, kind of going like high level, what my dog is in my lap.
Good.
So going more high level, what would you say like is kind of the wisdom that you've gained from being able to talk to animals?
Um, the wisdom I've gained from being able to talk to animals is, well, as an introvert, it just makes it easier to be in the world amongst people. Because it drains me to talk to humans, but I can hang out with animals all day long. The open-hearted compassion and just the ability to like let stuff go, to like move forward without needing to cling so hard to the past, without needing to logically understand why things are happening. When Spike and I go out into the world, when we drive a lot, we travel full time. So we'll be in the car for like 8 hours. I'll be grumpy because I've been stuck inside all day. Like if Spike's on my lap for too long, I get like sensory overload and I have to put him in his bed. And so we'll both kind of be like annoyed and like ready to get out of the car. And then as soon as we get out of the car, Spike's tail is wagging and he's just like, great, we're here. I'm happy to be here. And I'm still kind of holding on to the grumpiness of, like driving in a car for 8 hours. And so just but to see him be so happy and just so, okay, we're here now. Now's our time to, do our thing. It's like, okay, yeah, I can just shake it off, let it go, and just be happy that I made it. I don't have to be upset that it took so long.
Yeah, yeah, that's something that Bambi impressed on me too, is that she was just so thrilled to go for a walk or to get her food. And it's just like, why can't I just be like so happy, every day for these things that we do every single day?
I had a boyfriend one time with another dog who he comes home and greets the dog like we all do, so excited, or oh, so good to see you. Oh, look at you. And then he's like, hey, Morgan. And I'm like, well, why don't I get a greeting like the dog? And he's like, why don't you greet me like the dog?
Yeah,
And I was like,
exactly.
well, that's a fair point.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not, I didn't even get off the couch when you came home. My dog is like throwing a parade.
yeah, totally. And I always like to ask people, what's your intuitive origin story?
My intuitive, like, how did I get in touch with my intuition?
Like going all the way back to, sometimes people in childhood have these skills, then they forget about it, or sometimes realize, later on, what was kind of that first moment that you realized you were intuitive?
So I grew up with friends who were really interested in psychic work. And um, I never didn't believe in it, but I didn't really realize it was a skill that you could hone. And I didn't realize it was a skill that I intuitively had, where I would just like you mentioned, the clairs, like most people lean more towards one, they have more of a strength, but you can heighten all of your instinctual abilities. So for me, I've always had just the clear knowing, like a name will pop in, and suddenly, like the person I'm meeting, like that's their name, or I the like clear the clear seeing. I Someone would be talking to me, and I would just like get a flash of what they were about to tell me, and it was like I was tuning into their thought process, and I could see where their brain was going. So I've always had this ability. I just didn't realize not everyone had this, or not everyone was in touch with it. But because all of my friends were into it, we would do psychic tests where we would like, be thinking of a color and then like test each other on the color. And sometimes I would get it, and sometimes I wouldn't. It really depended on who I was working with. But my girlfriend asked me if I could meditate with her when we were like 11 years old, and I'd never meditated before. And so I'm like, yeah, let's play meditation. And so we're just sitting there, and I all of a sudden was in like the Om space where like I
Wow.
wasn't in my body, but I wasn't out of my body. I wasn't somewhere else, but I was just like everything was shut down and I was in this space. And I come to with my friend like shaking me awake. And she was like,
Oh,
Morgan,
wow.
Morgan. And I was like, kind of snapped out of it. And I was like, oh, is that meditation? How did it go? And she was like, what are you talking about? It's been like 45 minutes. Like, I've been trying to snap you out of this like trance that
Oh
you
my
were
gosh.
in. Like, where did you go? What happened? And I was like, I didn't go anywhere. It just was like, even now it was just like the most peaceful place I've ever been. And it was such a gift to experience that at a young age, but it was many years before I really got deep into a meditation practice. And I had to like relearn how to get to that space and
Wow.
learn all of the methods because it never came to me that intuitively ever again. But that's kind of where it first started of like, oh, I may have access to something that other people don't have access to. And now that I'm older, I understand it's just because I've had so many lives on this planet that's like, I'm just, I've played this game before. So I have a lot of skills and it's all very familiar to me. And, there are newer souls on this earth who haven't experienced that. But it's the time that it actually became like, oh, I can actually like use this in my career and make a living from it happened when uh, I was getting into yoga. I was still working in the corporate world, and I started taking on private clients as a yoga teacher. And I would just know what their physical problem was without them having to tell me because I could feel it in my body. I would know karmically the purpose behind it, right? Like depending on where you get injured, it's a manifestation of some sort of, spiritual or emotional tumult, and I would know how to help them resolve it. And I would just instantly have this information about people who hired me as their yoga teacher. So that's when I was like, I need to start marketing myself as a healer because, first of all, people need this. And there's a much more efficient way to go about this than, sitting in talk therapy for 20 years.
Yeah.
Most of my healing clients who come to me, we only work together for a handful of sessions, sometimes even just one, and it'll just like resolve a problem that they've been having for decades. And so that's when I realized, oh, this is what I came here to do. Like, this is the whole reason that I'm here, and I need to honor that. And the more that I do this work, the more I look back onto, past situations from my life, the types of people who were attracted to my energy, extremely traumatized people. Makes sense. I'm a healer. Of course, they're seeking a healer. The types of people who don't like me, right? People who aren't ready to face their stuff, people who aren't ready to heal. Fine, I don't have to take that personally. But yeah, the real moment that it started, like growing up, I always had a strong connection to animals, all the things you hear about like highly sensitive people and empaths. I would have just that clear knowing of understanding where people were. And I would have moments where I would like step to the side and then like a tree branch would fall right then. So I was
Oh,
like really
yeah.
connected to my guardians where they would like just allow me to be safe as I move through this world. But it wasn't until that meditation event where I was like, oh yeah, not everyone has this experience. Everyone can, but not everyone has it intuitively.
Yeah, which I find so fascinating, at a young age, which it makes me think like sometimes when you try something for the first time, you have so few expectations that it sort of dissolves your resistance to whatever it is. And, most people to meditate in that way have to practice like daily for multiple years before they can even get close to that. So, do you think that you had a previous lifetime where you were maybe a monk or something like that? Or how do you think about it?
I have definitely had flashbacks to significant religious organizations from my past lives. I don't have the details and I haven't done that much work with other psychics. I don't know if you have this experience. It's really hard for me to read for myself when I'm trying to, but
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
yeah, all right, you understand.
Yeah.
But the flashbacks I get, uh, they're like, I don't want to say negative experiences, but it was a very manipulative environment. And that's a big part
Okay.
of my mission here on this earth and this lifetime is to like break people free from that religious construct, which can be a path to enlightenment. It can absolutely be a path to, the peace and the well-being that we're all seeking. But so often it turns into control, right? Other people controlling you. And so I feel like that was a big part of my past lives is like I was given that path and maybe a few of my past lives in the context of religion. And it's become such a toxic atmosphere on this earth that we need to break it apart. But I do think that was one of the gifts of my past lives was just the ability to connect to spirit through a variety of sources, because there's no wrong path to enlightenment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what's interesting about kind of the idea of soul development is that you come into a lifetime to learn something and it's doesn't mean that there could be something wrong with it, but it helps develop a certain skill, which then plays in later on.
Yeah, I kind of think of it like I like the video game analogy where it's like in the beginning of the game or in one of your lives, like you picked up a random scroll that you didn't think was going to come in handy. And then later on down the line, you like have to trade it to a wizard for, something else that you need for another adventure. It's like, yeah, we don't have to understand these things. They don't have to make sense at the time, but everything that happens to you is going to come in handy. And if you're, a spiritual warrior, you're going to learn how to transmute it into positive action, right? Into some form of joy or peace. And it's been an honor to go through this event many times in many lives. And it's also like I've had past lives many times as a dog, as a wolf, as four something with four legs. And one of my psychic friends told me as a message from my guides, like, we're really grateful you agreed to come on two legs this time because I always prefer to come in dog form. It's just way more fun.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and so the last thing I wanna talk about is, I think you kind of referenced, like, animals supporting people with their awakening, and I would say with Bambi that, I had wanted to adopt a dog for a while, but there was the sense that this particular time that I adopted her just happened to be the time I was getting into astrology and energy healing and all of that. So do you find that to be a theme that, the animals tend to show up at that particular time?
Absolutely. Yeah. Spike showed up in my life. I mentioned I'd ended a relationship. I just gotten laid off from a job. And like a month after I adopted him, I had a terrible injury. I tore my ACL. It was a 2-year recovery. I had multiple surgeries. And Spike was there for me through it all. He was absolutely 100% sent in order to help me through that journey. My previous dogs before him, I had a pit bull when I was in my early 20s with my boyfriend at the time. And he came into my life when I had just dropped out of college. I had just moved to Seattle and I had just started a new job, started a new relationship. And then this new dog came into my life. As a child, different dogs came into my family. They weren't like my dogs, they were the family dogs, right? I wasn't their alpha. But you definitely see like, oh, my parents got divorced and a dog came into our life, or I had a lot of health problems as a child, so there was one time they thought I had a significant kind of cancer and I had to have a few different surgeries. And then a kitten would appear to help me through those surgeries. My brother had cancer when he was in his late teens, and our cat at the time, who we'd had for many years, we couldn't let the cat into the room because of the surgical scar, the surgical area. But that cat camped outside of Matt's door the whole time he was recovering for months at a time. And as soon as we let him in, nothing could keep that cat off the bed. So it was like, oh
Oh,
yeah, this cat is here for Matt. Like we understand that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I absolutely agree with that, that pets are called into our existence absolutely when we need them. And what a gift. What an honor. It's one of my favorite parts about living on this earth as a human is getting to take care of pets.
Yeah, amazing. Well, thank you so much, Morgan. So let us know where can people follow along and find you and learn more about your work.
Yeah, Instagram's probably the best place. I'm at splendid.yoga, and you can learn about all the different types of work that I do in this world. Although, as I mentioned, I don't market myself as an animal communicator. I do use my psychic skills in all of my work as a yoga teacher, as a business coach, as a marketing coach, and as a life coach. So yeah, go find me on Instagram and say hi. Let me know you found me from this podcast, and let's talk about all the psychic stuff. I love nerding out on this stuff.
Yeah, amazing. All right. Well, we'll have all those links in the show notes. So thank you so much, Morgan.
Thank you.
I hope this podcast brings you closer to your furry friends. And if this episode made you think of someone, why not share it with them? You can send the link in a text message, an email, or even put it in an Instagram story. And to help us reach more people with heartwarming and paradigm shifting stories about animal consciousness, please leave the podcast a 5-star review.